Coming up this week on the Digital Lifestyle Show 803, we've got lots to talk about. Gary has a guest for us. We're going to be talking Gridserve and their EV charging stations and lots more. So Gary's got a great interview lined up for that. We'll be talking the latest Windows Insider news, new builds for Windows 10 last week, and we'll be speculating about Windows 10X. That's in the news at the moment. We're talking about that, plus smart home, plus lots more. So let's get straight to Gary and Richard. Gary and Richard, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to speaking to you once again, and we've got a good show this week. We've not just got our regular news, we've also got a guest joining us, Gary, and I think it suits your background.
It does indeed. So behind me is the rugby services, which is we talked about last week with the new improved chargers on the electric highway, which are being done by Electricity in cooperation with a company called Gridserve, and we've got Sam from Gridserve joining us later in the show, and I think that's going to be an excellent little interview because they are doing some amazing stuff in the electric and EV world, and I think also will help reassure people that it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that'll be looking forward to talking to Sam. So before we start, there was a few things we wanted to talk about. We were going to do our best to keep Richard off ranting but there are some things I wanted to talk about. We've got some, real news and some which are rumour and speculation, but we do like to talk about them a little bit. But I suppose we should preface this with, I want to talk about Windows 10X, and regular listeners know I'm a big fan of Windows 10X, having run it in the emulators and on my Super Lumia 950 XL, which works brilliantly. But there's been a couple of stories this week that Microsoft have decided to put 10X on the back burner, and we may not ever see it. We may not see it at all.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I think this was reported first by Brad Sams of Petri, I think, wasn't it? Who, I mean, it kind of confirms what I would say we've heard in terms of the mood music around Windows 10X, which was, of course, their wonderful container-based, lightweight operating system that was going to run on the Neo. Remember the Surface Neo?
Yes, yeah.
Of course you do. So it was
I was going to save them pennies for that.
Yeah, wonderful dual screen folding thing, the Surface Neo. That disappeared. And 10X is okay. It'll run on sort of clamshell style laptop / netbook type things. And then we heard mutterings that, well, I mean, and of course it was going to be continually updated as well. It was going to have apps and things running in their own sort of container spaces. So all good stuff, and a new GUI. And then it went really, really quiet. And it looks like this particular version of Windows has been shelved maybe indefinitely, possibly as Microsoft has refocused on Windows 10, seeing as well over 1 billion users are using Windows 10, and some of the stuff which was in 10X may well creep into Windows 10 instead, which makes a certain level of sense. It's just, if this is true, and I'm going to put a big old health warning on this, if it's true, and I think we'll know for sure once build has been and gone, then it's a bit disappointing, but perhaps not entirely surprising.
Yeah, I think you're right. Certainly the when the dual screen Neo was put, well, effectively they said it was delayed a year, didn't they? While they focused because of the pandemic, and there's been this renewed focus on Windows 10 desktop, which they mentioned last year as part because of the pandemic. It seems pretty clear that they're seeing that as the future. There's unannounced, but maybe we'll see it build. There's rumours of big UI changes coming to Windows 10, and they've already said they're investing in Windows 10 and focusing on Windows 10. So perhaps it looks like this is where the development is going, and they've decided why bother trying to convince people to move to a new platform when they've got one that's, like you mentioned, with billions of people using it. Just update that.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think they've probably looked into, is there any point in trying to compete, in the Chromebook space? And they thought, well, we've failed repeatedly with things like, so-called iPad killers and things. So, what ultimately is the point? Particularly if they can't be sure what's going to come out the gate, it's going to be really good from day one. And it wasn't sounding good when they were saying things like, well, 32-bit apps may not work, sort of Win32 apps may not work particularly well from day one. and you think, well, that's kind of what did for the Surface RT back in the day. So yeah, I think it's a shame, but and then again, I'm going to say if this is indeed the case, but yes, I think you're right. It's there's over a billion Windows 10 users out there, so focus on those really. And let's face it, Windows 10 has been somewhat tumbleweed-like for a while now. So hopefully, if they are refocusing, we'll see a lot more stuff happening in Windows 10. And as you say, build will be the big test.
Yeah, and I guess there's a lot of bits they can port over as well if they want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing which Brad mentioned as well, which I think is absolutely fair, is again the Surface Duo, which is pretty much the only thing that made it out of that big presentation that Panos did back at that 2019 Surface event. That also really has been very much, it feels like it's been sort of turned down in terms of priority for Microsoft. It has appeared in European markets now, but it was being sold at a vast discount. It's not really as big a thing as when they were initially plugging it. You don't see every single Microsoft sort of mouthpiece or VVP or what have you showing off their Surface Duos on Twitter anymore. So I think the test for the Duo is going to be if the Duo 2 turns up and what it's like, and I think it's certainly one of the expectations that Brad set out there was that perhaps the Duo is also going to be gently pushed into the background as well, which again, I have to say it makes sense for Microsoft's focus. They want to serve up the services. If you pardon the pun, have everything running Microsoft 365 from Azure. So why do you need the hardware? Samsung do a perfectly good phone, so why try and build their own one? They're an Android phone.
I think the focus is back on desktop massively, isn't it, at Microsoft?
Yeah, and someone else pointed out to me the other day that one of the things that may have affected this is the whole parallels on Chrome as well. Because they're suddenly getting Windows licenses on Chrome. It's on Chromebooks, but maybe they don't actually need to push into that hardware market to actually make money off it.
Yeah, possibly. Although I mean, I would say regarding the parallels on Chrome, you do need a pretty beefy Chromebook to run this stuff.
But then again, you probably would have done for 10X as well.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think the 10X was looking very ambitious and looking at what your average Chromebook is versus the one that can run parallels or in 10X. I doubt they would have had enough horsepower because Chrome OS was traditionally quite lightweight in comparison.
It was, yeah.
And I think if we're getting major UI changes to Windows 10, refinements, more modern looking, we're getting this new store with a more open model. You can see that's where all the effort's going into, and sacrificing Windows 10X, but then
yeah, absolutely. And if they can sort of move, I mean, a refresh of the GUI is one thing, and they keep on about changing the icons and things, which is all well and good. I would like to see every icon change so it's consistent. I'm still waiting for that. I'm sure it's everyone keeps saying it's coming, but it's like forget the start menu. Can we please dispense with some of the ancient Windows XP logos or icons that are still lurking in the OS? Once they're there, we're going to be happy. But if some of the architectural things that were promised for 10X make it into Windows 10, that I think will be excellent, because that I think is perhaps the major change. Certainly the updating of apps in the background, the container-based approach, I think will actually make for a much more stable and much more reliable experience.
Yeah, it's going to see whether that's technically possible, and that was the whole idea, I think, of 10X, wasn't it? Starting from the ground up with these models in place, whereas Windows 10 has got this legacy that maybe it doesn't enable that. They can certainly make the Windows 10X start menu on Windows 10. That's probably easy done, but the actual really clever good stuff, the under the hood stuff, is probably a lot harder to do. But if they're focusing on the desktop and bringing these changes, they could perhaps look at doing that over a longer period of time without the big bang approach that potentially means that you get small user adoption of a new OS, and all the focus is on that whatever 5% or whatever market share Windows 10X could get, while 95% of your users are using a UI from 5-6 years ago. So you can see why they would switch it around the other way and perhaps look at doing other ways of modernizing the core underneath.
For sure, yeah.
It's a shame, but anyway, we'll see. Build's going to be the big key, I think, isn't it? Whatever happens at build, I think that's going to set the stall for the next 12 months, and that we'll be able to see what Microsoft's priorities will be from there.
Exactly. Yes. I did wonder, how much of this was kind of, I hate to use the word controlled leaking, but maybe expectation management ahead of the publication of the agenda for build, because once that agenda goes out, we'll know for sure what's happening, because if it doesn't feature a lot of 10x, we'll know that 10x is not happening.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep my 950 with it running. It could be the subject of a video in a few years' time, the operating, along with my Longhorn videos.
I was going to say yes.
And my other one, what was the other one? I had another one which was I forgot what it was called now. It was a Windows pre-Windows 10 one. It was an ME to it was what was it? Neptune. There we go. So Neptune, Longhorn, and 10x running on a Lumia 950 XL. So coming your way in the next 10 years.
Brilliant.
We did get some actual new builds last week of stuff we can test. We had 21376 insiders on the dev channel, which had the new font in there.
Oh, Segoe, yes, or Segoe, how's it pronounced?
I was going to ask you guys that, actually. I always see it's Sergio, but I know it's not Sergio, but it always makes me think of a name of Sergio.
Well, the golden rule is if somebody mispronounces a thing, it's because at least they've made the effort to try and read it. So I'm going to go for Segoe. Segoe. I don't know. It's probably
so
this is this is just how limited it's getting really in Windows at the moment. The exciting thing on the fastring / dev channel is a new font. Yay!
Yeah, I've not tried it on anything that I've only got it on my Surface Go at the moment, so I've not really been able to see it. I think I should hook my Surface Go up to my 4K monitor. I might be able to see the improvements then. But
yeah, be warned, it's looking a bit strange at the moment because as they said to themselves, it's not across the whole UI yet. So you've got this weird situation at the moment where you might see some bits in one font and some bits in another font, because let's face it, Microsoft just loves a consistent user interface. Aside, it doesn't love a consistent user interface. Is that mean?
And that's where I'm hoping that maybe at Build Dem we'll see a lot of things that are coming in the next few months that we'll start to see in the Insider program. So it's not just sort of font changes and icon changes. We actually see some of these developments that are coming. But anyway, that's the discussion we can have pre and after build.
And of course, there's also the choice of the new Office font, as well, isn't it? Because Calibri is no more. There's going to be a whole range of Office fonts coming up.
Yeah.
Yep. So Calibri is not no more though. Is it still there? It's just
it's still there. It just won't be the default.
Because you just panicked a lot of people by saying that.
I'm sorry, Calibri. I apologise. Quite right, Gary. Thanks for the correction there. Yes, Calibri's not going away, but there will be a new font. And I think they've provided. Is it a list of 5?
Comic Sans. It's Comic Sans. That's the one that's coming.
No, it's not Comic Sans.
all of Windows is being redone in Comic Sans. So you heard it, exclusive news here first. Sun Valley is based on Comic Sans all the way through. The other thing this build had as well was some HDR settings and a couple of things like that. There was nothing really. Oh, the Kinect app had a new icon as well. Yeah. But so I think that was it. Really, it wasn't a huge amount.
No, I mean there were a bunch of useful fixes. I mean there was one around Windows. So for the next File Explorer launching faster was good. Some fixes in using interests, because everyone likes using interests.
Very important.
That's what the Windows 10X team have been shunted across to. They've all pulled off the Windows 10X and they're all working on using interests. That's now the right priority.
I think that's basically perhaps the phrase is punished by moving to. We're sending you to news and interests. You go and work in there for a while now. That's not getting containers working properly under Windows 10X.
Yeah. Yes. That's what it is. Ian, what's the matter with your smart home?
What's
the matter with your smart home? Because there might be nothing with the matter with your smart home at the moment, but there certainly will be. because I just love this. So Matter is the new name of something which has been called Connected Home over IP, which is the new standard for smart homes. And I think actually this one is going to stick. I think it's a new standard.
A new standard that
a
will
new
stick.
standard, but it's a new standard built on an old standard because it's basically built over the top of Zigbee and Wi-Fi networking. So it's connected over IP. But the thing about this is the people behind it. So it's basically got Apple, Google, Amazon, and Samsung behind it, which I think means it's going to be pretty well adopted. In fact, if it only had Amazon behind it, it would have been well adopted. But the fact it's got the big players in this are all going to come across, and things. It's a standard which is, I say, it's built on existing standards. That means certain things will be able to adopt it. I mean, Philips have already said that even 9-year-old light bulbs are going to be able to have adopted to this standard and be able to work over it. So look out for a lot of talk about Matter over the next few months. It's only just been announced and the detail hasn't really been fleshed out yet, but expect to see a lot of announcements on it. Google are driving it quite hard, so I think we'll probably see a lot of that in the Google I/O, and I suspect we'll start seeing Amazon mentioning it a lot more. But it's something you can push out quite easily as an update to existing hardware stacks, particularly if they run Zigbee already or have a Wi-Fi radio. So I think it's good to see some standardization, because at the moment it's a nightmare if you shift from one provider to another provider. It's a real pain, as you know.
Yeah.
So
and something we didn't mention last week, but I need to have a look at, is the Samsung SmartThing app. They've got a UWP app for Windows.
They've got the Windows. So it's. I've heard some good things and some bad things about it. I've certainly heard there's potentially some issues with it in terms of what it does compared to what the main app does on Android. But it's great to see it. I mean, having a dashboard you can run on your desktop, which looks really nice. I have to say, the look of it is really cool. It's the new paradigm they're using for their whole design on smart things going forward. So it's a shape of things to come for anybody who's got smart things. And obviously, I've been playing quite a bit like that lately, so it's nice to see it out there. The other one thing it has got on there, which is quite good, is the Find My Device feature. So you can track all your phones and things just from your desktop now, which is
right. Yeah.
If you've got, especially you've got a Samsung phone, which a lot of us have, they have this built in by default. So yeah, it's got some nice features. I think there are some people who have said that certain bits of it are a little bit flaky, but it's a first generation iteration of it, so I think we'll see that improve rapidly. They seem to iterate quite quickly on their software. The other thing on SmartThings, just while thinking about it, there's an update rolling out back for the SmartThing Hubs 2 and beyond, which will give them that Zigbee 3 functionality, which is quite good, because that's a lot of the low power Zigbee devices and modern devices are all on Zigbee 3. So that improve compatibility for the older hubs, which is nice, since the last thing SmartThings did for the older hubs was to make them obsolete, the very old ones. So it's nice to see they're actually not doing that with the ones which are primarily out there. The 2000 the SmartThing Hub 2 2000, I think it's 9 onwards, were very, very common devices. So I think that's worth denoting that they're not obsolete in those. The other thing I was gonna ask, it's Patch Tuesday today, isn't it? I think. I wonder if we'll get as we record on Tuesday. I know this goes out on Thursday, but as we record on Tuesday, I wonder if we'll get the May 2021 update this week, or they'll release it to seekers. I love that term, via Windows Update, and they won't do it through Windows Update on the Patch Tuesday update. They'll hold that back maybe a week, and it'll be available next week, and then it will be in the what we're looking at, June Patch Tuesday, something like that.
Possible. I mean, they did release a new 21H1 build today.
Yeah.
To beta and release preview. Whether or not that's going to appear as an update to seekers, I don't know. I'd say probably not. I think perhaps they'll see how this goes on beta and release preview, and then, as you say, perhaps do an update for seekers maybe over the weekend or next week.
Yeah, so that it doesn't get caught with the Patch Tuesdays that people.
Yeah, I mean, because basically, yeah, it's a Patch Tuesday build that's gone out. Actually, it's a build 1.043.985. So that's what's gone out to the beta release preview channel. So and it's just, again, as you say, it's Patch Tuesday fixes. but I got a feeling, as you say, they'll hold back to not confuse it with the rest of the patches.
Yeah,
but it's got to happen
maybe.
too.
Yeah, it's called the May update. So yeah, now is the month.
Exactly.
And there was one other thing that I wanted to mention before we jump over to our interview. There's a new VR headset on the way.
Yeah, well, there's several actually, aren't there? It seems to be this has been the week for VR stuff. Because there was we had Vive, and also I think some Sony PSVR as well was announced. Starting with the Vive, I think it was there's a conference or a show happening at the moment, and they've unveiled, I think, 2 new headsets. One is the Vive Pro 2, and one is the Vive Focus 3. I think the Vive Focus 3 is the one that initially looked quite interesting because, of course, it's a standalone headset, much like the Oculus Quest 2 is, but it's got the same processor, I think, as the Quest 2, but it's got a 5K LCD set of lenses, so which is pretty impressive. Also, I think even more impressive, it's got a much wider degree of view. I think it's 120 degrees in. It's a lot more, I think, than the Nigel Book. And of course, it's also got it also jumps up as I think it goes to 120 hertz as well, or is it 90 hertz?
Don't know. I've not seen the full spec.
Yeah, so it's a pretty impressive thing. The sad thing is I think it's aimed pretty much squarely at business, because it's going to go for, I think, just under $1,400. So it's pretty expensive. Which is a shame, and the of course it's standalone though, and the Pro 2, which of course you got to plug in, that's I think got the same LCD panel arrangement, which is kind of like almost 5,000 pixels by 2,500 pixels in total. It's about 2,500 by 2,500 per eye. That I think is also going to go for just under $1,400 if you need to get all the base stations as well. So they're both pretty expensive, but that resolution I think that's even higher than the HP Revo, isn't it? Yeah,
it is.
I mean, things will look stunning through that, but the cost is a little bit ouchy.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can probably talk about some more of that next week, because I wanted to find out if you got that link working. But we'll talk about that on the show next week.
Spoilers, I did.
Yay. Well, you can explain that to us. So I think we better go over to our interview. So Gary, you've got a guest for us this week, so over to you.
Indeed, I have. So I'm joined by Sam Clarke from Gridserve, and you've got a fantastic job title, Sam. I really love your job title. You want to explain it to us?
Chief Vehicle Officer, which is pretty cool, isn't it? And I must admit, the Toddington Harper, our CEO, very kindly invented that for my benefit, but I haven't come across another one yet. So
great.
Yeah, so but it's an interesting role you've got anyway within Gridserve, and we ought to give a bit background actually what Gridserve is. It's a phenomenal company. I've been involved in the business for a few years now. Firstly as an advisory board member, but then more recently as an employee in the last year or so. But throughout that period of time, the transition of the business has been phenomenal. But we very much adopt a sun to wheel logic of trying to, as opposed to well to wheel. So rather than taking oil out the ground and burning it and moving it and refining it and burning it again and then finally burning it again in a car and wasting 70% of the energy with heat. We take more of a sustainable approach of harvesting energy from the sun, building solar farms and hybrid solar farms with battery storage, using that storage to trade and use for energy requirements, and then a network of electric vehicle forecourts and hubs and service stations and the like to be able to distribute that energy, that green energy, to the vehicles of the future. So it's about much more sustainable supply chain really for energy. That's really good. So, and you started basically with solar, didn't you? So the solar farms was the starting point of Gridserve, if I remember rightly.
Yes. So, I mean, a lot of the heritage of Todd, our CEO, and his background is in the solar world. So that's very much where the business began, but was never intended to be the only element. It was very much one part of the wider mix.
And I interviewed your guys 3 years ago at Fully Charged Live when you first started talking about the Braintree site, which and I must admit at that time we were having talks amongst a lot of the EV journalists at the time there, and sort of, I have to be honest, fairly sceptical of whether you could actually achieve it, but you really have achieved it. I mean, do you want to explain a little bit what the Braintree site actually is for people? Because I should say our audience isn't all EV drivers. There's a lot of people on, and Richard and Ian being people who considered and not quite got to EVs yet. And I think one of the areas of scepticism has been the whole charging infrastructure, particularly on the motorways and services, and whether there's going to be enough available for people. And what you've done, I think, is pretty remarkable, actually. So,
yeah, thank you. I think one thing to say straight away is it's quite an honour actually to be able to speak in front of the non-EV drivers, because they still represent over 99% of the registrations of vehicles on the road today. So that is the audience that we really need to try and speak to be honest. I mean, I spend much of my time speaking at webinars and presenting at various forums, but a lot of the time it is preaching to the converted, which is the minority. But the majority is coming in and is transitioning, as the statistics and registrations are demonstrating. So to be able to talk to the people that actually that are looking at moving into this direction, and the transition over to EVs is an absolute joy, because they're the ones that we need to try and get into the comfort zone of thinking this is a practical solution. And personally, I've been driving an EV for nearly 20 years, and I can safely say that the first few years were not that easy. There were only 2 charge points in London.
Yeah,
right?
what were they then?
What were they? Well, there's a lovely, very ugly little quadricycle car called a G-Whiz, which I had very early.
Yes,
I had a Vectrix motorbike, as well as a number of different electric motorbikes as well in the early days. So things which your listeners probably have never heard of, I suspect. But like anything, you've got to start somewhere. And the same goes for the infrastructure, and it's been evolving very dramatically over a long period of time now. It's not just the last couple of years that it's become, the front and center in terms of people's minds, but, the infrastructure's been growing for decades now. It's just that the acceleration of it from here forward needs to be substantial because of the acceleration of the vehicles, and we need the infrastructure to support that. So to answer your question, Gary, which I've not got around to, as far as the forecourt is concerned, that's really our flagship at the moment, and it's a phenomenal site that has a tremendous amount of power connected to it. We've got 5 megawatt grid connection and 6 megawatt hours of battery, and in layman's terms, 6 megawatt hours of battery roughly translates to around 24,000 miles of EV driving at any given time. So we're able to support a huge amount of vehicles in one location, and the location itself has 36 chargers on it. It's not just 1 or 2, but 36. 6 of those are Tesla superchargers. 6 of them are AC chargers, which are similar to the ones that people have on their driveways. AC 22 kilowatts, so a little bit more powerful than ones that people see on the driveway, but nonetheless they are there. But they are deemed to be some of the slower chargers. They're useful for some customers that don't have DC high power charging, like 10,000 Renault Zoes out there on the road today that don't have DC high power charging, and even some Teslas that don't have CCS connections, which is a more modern connection, which some of the Teslas can't use the superchargers as a result of that. So we've got some to cater for that. And then the sort of major stuff is the 24 high-powered DC chargers beneath our twinned solar canopy, which produces a huge amount of energy to each individual charger. 12 of those are up to 90 kilowatts, and 12 of them are up to 350 kilowatts. And there is no, I don't know of any cars on the road today that can charge that fast yet. There will be in the future, but there isn't yet. So it's very much future-proofed, such that the drivers of the future, or the drivers of today and the drivers of the future, will be able to put a very meaningful amount of energy into their vehicles in 5, 10, 15 minutes and be able to drive 100, 200 miles on that. And that will be the site has been designed to cater for that sort of functionality, as well as a big building with a Costa and a post office and a Gourmet and a Booths and a WH Smith and all that kind of traditional retail concession that you might expect at a service station environment. And then meeting pods and waiting areas and big screens and well-being areas and cars on display and leasing availability, etc. upstairs. So it's more than just the charging location. It's many things.
So did I hear rightly that your exercise bikes are connected to your
yes
charging?
Yes, they are. So the energy that some or a large amount of the energy generated in cycling these bikes is then put back into the grid. In fact, I did a webinar last year, a 2-hour webinar, and half of it, and I was presenting at the time, which was a challenge, but I did half of the webinar whilst cycling, so that my face was getting redder and redder as the hour went on. But I managed to accumulate around, I think from memory, it was about 75 watts of energy, which is not a lot. You know, it was about a quarter of a mile's worth of driving in my EV, but nonetheless, it isn't wasted. It's reused back into the grid. So it's a nice contribution. It's a nice story. It's better than just wasting it in heat, right?
Indeed. So kilowatts get non-EV drivers really confused. So your car is going to be able to charge at a certain amount of power. So kilowatt is the power you're delivering. Kilowatt hours is how much you're storing.
Correct.
So cars are quoted as having a certain number of kilowatt hours you can store, and then you can charge them at a certain rate.
Yes.
And I think the lot of confusion people have is they say, well, I've only got a 50 kilowatt rated car. Can I charge it at 350 kilowatts? Or I've got a 22 kilowatt AC or a 7 kilowatt AC. Can I use it because I still use it 20 kilowatts? And it gets really confusing for a lot of people.
Yeah, it does. Kilowatts versus kilowatt hours gets confusing straight away as well. I mean, the way that I always describe that is the kilowatts is like water out of a tap, and the more water that comes out, the higher amount of kilowatts, and then what it's going into, i.e. the glass or the vessel that the water is holding, is the kilowatt hours. And that's typically how I induct our new starters into explaining what the difference between those two things. One's a flow of water and the other one is what you keep the water in. And then as far as that charging point is concerned, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of the modern DC cars, high-powered charging on cars at the moment is typically around the 50 kilowatt mark. But there's two things to consider. One is if you plug into a 350 kilowatt charger, it's not going to go bang. It just means that that's as much as your car can take of the energy that is available. And second to that, there is a thing called a charging curve, which means the car doesn't always charge at the same rate all of the time. So if it's very warm outside and you've got a very low state of charge, then you'll typically get a much higher rate of energy flowing into your car than you would if the car was very full of energy on a cold day, because batteries don't charge as fast when it's cold or when their state of charge is high. So that's the other thing we've got to try and educate and inform people around. Is we've had lots of people who drive EVs now that come to the forecourt and don't understand why they can't charge as fast as their car says it can. And that's because it depends on where it is on that charging curve in terms of the charging speed, and that's something else which needs to be understood, because this high powered stuff, you don't really want to be sat on a charger from 90% to 100%, because it will take a really long time to top up the cells and do that last 10%, which is typically why OEMs will say 20 to 80% charging speeds, because that's that sweet spot where you get the highest amount of energy distributed is sort of between 10 or 20% up to 80 or 90% state of charge.
Yeah. And some of the modern EVs, that's still going to be a very long journey to, if you could push it up to 80% before you start driving again. So are you actually contributing to this education? Have you got something within the site to actually help people learn about these things?
Yeah, we're working on that all of the time. As you know, we've got quite a lot on our plate in terms of building forecourts.
Indeed. We'll come to that in a minute.
Station network. So we've got quite a lot to do, but the marketing guys are working really hard as well to continually improve the website. So we've got a couple of documents which are not yet live, but they will be shortly, an FAQ and a glossary of terms guides that we're going to put on the website, which cover absolutely everything. And it's thousands and thousands of words of information around all of this different terminology that you can search for the bits the things that you're looking for. But this education is so important, because there's so much that we all need to do in terms of getting people into the comfort zone of understanding what this terminology means, and then applying it to their real world of driving around and charging and feeling comfortable that this isn't going to be a huge issue. And actually, we want to take away all that negativity, the range anxiety, the charge anxiety, the battery's not lasting very long. That this stuff is diminishing now with education, because range anxiety is diminishing because the cars are going so much further. Charge anxiety is diminishing because we're building some stuff which is truly incredible and will take that anxiety away. And the cars themselves that have been out there on the road for a long time now, the Nissan Leafs have proven huge robustness in terms of their batteries over a long period of time. So we're continually trying to myth bust and educate as we go along to try and get people in the comfort of knowing that these things aren't a negative, and actually they're really, really good fun to drive. It's a real positive experience. It shouldn't be conceived to be a negative one. They are fantastic machines to drive. And as I've been enjoying for the last 18 years plus, and I want to get that passion out there and say it to other people because they are a joy.
Excellent stuff. So talk about that negativity. I mean, one thing that gets pushed back to me quite often when I'm talking about EVs to these guys and other people around is the whole perception of particularly the motorway services charging and the reliability and everything. And you've got yourself fairly heavily involved in that in the last few months. And I just, before we step into that, I just want to actually say that I think EV drivers as a whole owe the electric highway and Ecotricity a great vote of thanks for what they did initially, because without them to start, I don't think with the kickstart we got in the EV would have happened in this country, because they basically were the only people putting chargers out. When you had those two in London, they were the people who started putting them out and about. But it has to be said, over the last few years, the reputation has been hit by reliability problems, and I think that's been a lot down to the equipment they've been using and not been able to upgrade it. But you've leapt in and things are starting to change, I believe.
They are, and you're absolutely right, Gary, and I appreciate you saying that. And I've suffered the network as well as enjoyed it over many years as well, long before I started at Gridserve. But Dale and Ecotricity have done a tremendous job in putting stuff in the ground in the first place. They were a pioneer in it, and and we're hoping to now help them along that journey and produce some really, really cool stuff that's going to go in the ground, which is going to help the next generation. And perhaps there was a bit of a lag there where things started to degrade a bit too much, and there was a bit of frustration around the network. But we're going to fix that now. We started fixing it, and as you alluded to, Rugby is the first site that we've done in partnership with Ecotricity, and we've got 12 very high power 350 kilowatt chargers there, which are being used already at tremendous amounts. It's only been they've only been in the ground and live for the last week or so, and already the utilization is really, really positive. So we're delighted to see that, and the more we've got a very, very ambitious plan to upgrade an awful lot of the network, if not all of it, within a very short period, even within this year. So there's going to be huge change on this network now. And we're delighted to be part of that journey.
I have to say that the rugby was superb going there the other day. No, my only concern about rugby was the fact it was absolutely pouring rain and I got soaked. But
when you finally get your chance to go to Braintree, you'll be under the cover of a 200 kilowatt peak solar array, which is also a roof. So so that it serves two very useful functions, keeping you dry and generating energy. But it's not necessarily quite as easy to put. I've seen a lot of comments on the social media around putting some sort of covering over them, and it's not so easy to do that. So there is an element of needing to find cover, which is it's something that the networks, us and others, need to consider in the future. And it's not just about a cover either; it's about accessibility for disabled access, for example.
Absolutely,
and similarly for commercial traffic to be able to park, because the sort of reverse-in, nose-in logic we have at Rugby is great. It's fine for all cars pretty much, but doesn't necessarily sort out vans and trucks and buses. So there's other considerations, whether it be coverers, accessibility to larger vehicles, disabled access. All those things now need to be considered as well in a bit of detail.
The other one I got commented on when I was actually there was parent and child as well. People were struggling to get in and out with children. So I think that you've done a really good job there. I mean, I have to say that between you and Ecotricity, the layout there is great, but also the ease of use. I mean, that's the one thing I've really noticed. No apps, just contactless. It just works.
And that needs to happen too, doesn't it? I mean, I think every CPO, every charge point operator, it should be, in my humble opinion, adopting a contactless solution, because it makes it easy for the customer, just anybody, to turn up with any card and pay. Now, like anybody, we would love to harbour some loyalty, and some membership schemes will be forthcoming, and we'd love people to subscribe to our apps and use our functionality, have memberships with us, all that stuff. Like anybody else in a commercial environment, we would like to try and harbour that loyalty by virtue of discounted rates in the future. But we should still always have a contactless solution, so you can turn up with any card and pay for your energy. And it needs to be that simple. Just needs to be.
And the other thing I liked about this, it's not really at a premium either. It's cheaper than a lot of the competitors charging are, which is, as I said to someone who hadn't visited rugby, why would you go anywhere else if you've got the convenience of something like this? It's on the services. Why would you hunt out further afield?
Yeah, and that's one of the wider challenges that I think the networks or the industry have got in terms of the locations of where things are situated. So, we're delighted to be working with Ecotricity and utilising that network at the service stations because it's ultimately where you want it to be. There is a risk factor that we've got an awful lot of charging stations out in the UK all over the place that some of which are degrading quite quickly and are also in slightly awkward places. So the ones that are in awkward places are awkward and therefore they're probably not going to get used much in the future. And the ones that are well placed, if there's only one, then your likelihood is, and you get there, almost certainly someone else is going to be using it.
Yeah,
I've heard two people give me an example in the last 24 hours of instances where they used to, and it's just like I was 18 years ago with 2 chargers in London. There was a point when I could use it every day, and then somebody else kept beating me to that charger, and all of a sudden it's not available. We can't have that. We can't have people queuing up around the corner waiting for a couple of chargers that are, we need that. We need 6, 12 minimum charges at the moment in these areas like rugby to make sure that we can facilitate lots of people simultaneously at the same place, because driving around and searching for one is going to wind people up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And if they get there and it doesn't work, even worse. So reliability and choice is absolutely paramount.
And I love hearing you say that, because that's been the main. I think it's actually one of the things, main things holding back a lot of people in terms of buying EVs. I mean, Ian and Richard, certainly something we've talked about is that long journey and knowing you're going to be able to charge en route and find a charger which is open and not have to go off route to find it. And I mean, a lot of early adopters like ourselves, we're happy to do a bit of planning and find our routes, but most people are lazy. They don't want to do that. They just want to get in the car and drive. So it's great you've got that. So you talked about having more chargers at each service. That's part of the plan, isn't it? If I understand rightly.
Yeah, it is. So we've got constraints like everybody else does in terms of power in, and certain sites will be like the one at Rugby is a great example of, because it's a brand new site. We had the great opportunity to be able to put what we did in, straight away. Much of that work was done with Ecotricity prior to us. There are other sites that we're going to be upgrading where it'll be a straight swap for now, and there'll be certain sites that we'll be able to actually upgrade as we go along quite quickly. So we can't. Rugby is a great example of what service stations need to be, but we've also got to be cognizant of the fact that we can't do that everywhere on day one. There are constraints with power, etc. That means we might have to be a bit more clever with battery storage potentially, or other means by which to get the power where it needs to be for the network. So there is no silver bullet to any of this, and it will take some time to develop the network. We are upgrading an awful lot very, very quickly, but it's not going to be at the same level as rugby everywhere overnight. It's just not going to happen.
I suppose some of these old service stations, the motorway ones, have got the infrastructure's been there for years and years, and just hasn't got the infrastructure that you need in place.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what we need to understand, and the government's helping with this, is upgrading the connections to these locations, the power that's beneath the ground that is around these areas. That if we can get the power to these locations, then the private industry can take over from there and deliver something meaningful at these locations. But it's a combination of getting the power to the right sort of place, and then for people like Gridserve and Ecotricity to deliver a solution for the user.
So even where you're just doing the straight upgrade, you're actually making some improvements there as well, aren't you? Because I know one of the things I've heard a lot, and particularly from fellow iPace drivers, is it's very difficult to charge a lot of services because they don't actually even have CCS. Some of them, they've just got CHAdeMO only chargers there, which dates back to the day when Ecotricity were working quite closely with Nissan, and quite rightly so at the time. I mean, that was the Leafs with the cars out there, so it's understandable. But I understand you're changing that as you go forward with these upgrades.
Yes, we will do. So we'll have a lot of the sites will have CHAdeMO, CCS, and potentially AC as well, I believe, connections on them, and we'll be able to charge two cars at the same time as well. So that effectively doubles the network almost in regards to being able to use one charger for 2 vehicles. So yeah, CCS is the sort of the winner at the moment in the sort of VHS Betamax type. Your listeners that will recognise those phrases as a sort of battle of two cassette tapes in the old days, one of them won true in the end, and I feel that CCS is probably winning that battle, but there is a huge amount of Japanese style companies like Nissan that still use that CHAdeMO, and we need to make sure that we have a solution for them as well as the CCS. But I think the most popular connector is almost certainly the CCS one, but we will certainly cater for both.
Yeah, and CCS is even Nissan is starting to use CCS for some of the upcoming vehicles. So for Europe, I think it is definitely the way to go. Although that's not the case necessarily in the rest of the world, but for here, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean that was actually one of the comments I had at rugby. Someone pulled in with Zoe and was looking for a Type 2 charger and couldn't find one. So that's I think that's something which obviously does still need to be out there, because the older Zoes can only use Type 2 rapid fast chargers. So it must be a huge challenge for you, keeping all the legacy vehicle owners happy as well as moving forward.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, I think the charger legacy is obviously a challenge, which is part of the reasons why we've worked so closely now with Ecotricity to help improve upon that. I mean, the vehicles themselves, we've effectively got two different types of charging in CCS and CHAdeMO, and that's it. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's 10,000 Renault Zoes. There's a proportion of Teslas as well that still rely on that Type 2 connector. But taking a sort of optimistic view of it, there are only 3 connector types, and most electric vehicles out there, and certainly nearly everything that's coming out in the market from here on, will have either a CHAdeMO or a CCS, most likely CCS. So it's important for us to be able to cater for everybody, but at least there aren't 20 different variables, because that really would be tricky. So yeah, it's a manageable amount,
Yeah, and I always say that this is like the unleaded versus leaded thing. You people just need to know what type of charger they've got on the car when they turn up, and so that's another part of the education thing.
It is. I mean, I've heard many a story of people who own EVs, like the ID3, for example, and didn't even know where the little flap at the bottom was for the CCS, and we've heard stories of people charging very slowly at service stations, not realizing that the CCS connector is another flap beneath they didn't even know was there. And that's a worry to me, because that means there's a lack of education right at the source of whoever sold that vehicle to them in the first place.
And that does seem to be definitely the case. I mean, I've certainly heard that myself as well. I've often thought that actually at chargers looked just an information sign up, just saying this is your charger, this is where you can find it potentially. Plug in. But that's good to hear. So let's take another step to another part of your business, which I think is really interesting as well. You actually are also in the leasing of cars space as well. And you mentioned that at Braintree you've got that effectively a showroom in your area for this. You've got an interesting package idea, which I don't think I've seen anybody other than Tesla do, which is to include some charging with your leases.
Yeah. So we would love to be part of the whole supply chain in terms of renewable energy, and that goes from harvesting energy out of the sky and putting it into batteries all the way through to selling people vehicles that then use that energy. So the leasing element of the business is incredibly important for the whole business case. It's something that we've worked hard on over the last 9 months to create our own presence in that space. We only lease electric vehicles, no hybrids, nothing else. It's only electric vehicles. And we provide packages that include energy or don't need to include energy. It's a consumer choice. But the idea and the principle behind that is that because we co-own and operate our own network of charging, that it stands to reason that we should be able to offer that as part of an inclusive package with a leased vehicle. And as we continue to upgrade the service station network, that will become more and more attractive to people, whereby they know that they've got an access to this sort of network like the one at Rugby we've spoken about. That means that they're able to utilize a very reliable, very high-powered charging network, and they don't need to pay anything at the pump, so to speak, to do so, because it's embedded in the vehicle lease. And that's just one of a number of different initiatives we're going to work out over the next few months and throughout this year in terms of other bells and whistles that might be coming that embellish upon that leasing proposition. As customers get more and more interested in this and having more of a turnkey solution.
So we talked about motorway services being improved. The other thing we've spoken about is Braintree. Now Braintree is a model for other charging service stations for you. Have you got anything else planned on that line?
Yes, very much so. So we've got I believe 5 or 6 sites that are due to be completed by the end of this year. And the intention for the business is to deliver over 100 of the forecourts over the next 5 years. So as well as the service station network improvements, we want to a whole suite, for want of a better expression, of electric forecourts around the UK, as well as a number of hubs as well. So we want to create another layer beneath, as well as the service station network, as well as the large electric forecourts. We want a layer of hubs as well, which will be 6 to 12 DC chargers in strategically placed locations as well, so that we can just, we can't do it all on our own, but we can certainly be one of the major players, hopefully, in delivering a solution which covers as many bases as possible for those drivers on the move.
Excellent stuff to hear. And the services are going in on major A roads, is that right? So you've got the motorway services as one part, and then you're filling the gaps effectively. I noticed that I saw you were aiming for planning permission around Norwich area, whereas I know there's a huge gap in Norfolk for that sort of level of charging. Is that the case where you, with the rest of the sites you're looking at?
It is and it isn't. I mean, yeah, you're correct, but at the same time, there's an awful lot of work that goes into the appraisal, analysis, and data crunching of every electric forecourt location, and proximity to busy roads is obviously a key marker. Now that can be an A road, it could be a motorway, it's something where we have to look at where the location is, how accessible it is from a major route, major road, what the local demographic is like, what the local population is like, what the local grid connections are like, the likelihood of planning permission, and a myriad of other things. So there's a number of different variables to consider when we look at sites for the electric forecourts, but it's not exclusively A roads. It's where it needs to be rather than what the road.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess on motorways, if there isn't existing services, that makes sense to have a forecourt there. So the other thing about your forecourt, we didn't just mention this, is that although they are targeted obviously for charging of EVs, you're not dissuading petrol cars from turning up at these forecourts. They can't refuel, but they can refuel themselves, I guess, in terms of food and drink and everything.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. We welcome ICE drivers, internal combustion engine drivers, because that's the 99% that we mentioned at the beginning. We absolutely welcome anybody and anything to come and have a coffee or just walk around and get a sense of what a charging station, a charging electric forecourt feels like and looks like, and see other people using it. It's important for us to do that. We've got many regular customers that come to the forecourt who don't drive EVs. They're coming for a coffee, to meet a friend, to shop at Booth's supermarket, which is down south, but it's a northern supermarket brand. I only recently learned. So we've got plenty
local
of people.
To me. Yeah.
There you go. Ian's accent gave it away. We've got meeting pods upstairs that people were using, and obviously aren't at the moment due to lockdown, but they will be released again or reopened again very shortly. So there's lots and lots of reasons why being at the forecourt is a good thing, irrespective of whether you're charging an EV. Now, if it happens to be that you end up leasing a vehicle through us, or converting yourself, or even just converting to electric in the fullness of time as a result of the experience that we've delivered, then that's great. But yeah, by no means do we discourage the petrol and diesel drivers, because we want those in the doors as well.
Excellent stuff. So Sam, is there anything else you wanted to mention while we've got you on? Is there any other things you think we ought to be talking to our listeners about?
I don't think so. I think you've very well touched on most things. I think the thing that I always say, and with all of these interviews, is how important education is to the wider audience, because it can be confusing how a vehicle charges, what charging speeds you get, what the numbers on the side of the thing mean, what a kilowatts and kilowatt hours mean, and all of this stuff. We need, as a community, as a collective, we need to help educate and inform the future EV drivers. And I think that's the most important point for me, because without giving them that comfort, then it's going to be difficult for the transition to happen. So yeah, all of these forums, things like this, are just incredibly important, which is why we're always delighted to speak about these points, because it's an important element for the whole industry to be able to help inform, educate, and put people in the comfort zone that this stuff isn't some newfangled technology which isn't going to work. It is here to stay. It does work. It's a joy to drive them, and please do join us.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. That has been brilliant. I hope it has reassured people. Ian, are you feeling more reassured about it?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I think it might be a place for me to go and have a look at some of the leasing options for the next time I change mine.
Brilliant. Does that mean I've done a good job? Do you feel like it's worth a look now?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it definitely made me curious to go and have a look. Certainly, and I think that's the point, in that you want to get not just EV fans, you just want to get anybody there to have a look around and see the infrastructure's in place and the options are there. So I think it's doing its job to sell the concept to everyone.
Yeah, and you just reminded me of one last point, actually, if I may, and that's that one thing we didn't touch upon is the total cost of ownership and the running of electric vehicles and the costs thereof. So there is an instinctive reaction that the EVs are more expensive than their petrol or diesel counterparts, and it's true that they are, although we've seen news just come out in the last few days around Bloomberg, I think it is, doing analysis saying that there should be cost parity between EVs and petrol by 2027. But actually the reality is they're cheaper now because they're cheaper to run. So on a vehicle lease, when you add in whatever you're driving now, you add in a vehicle lease plus petrol versus an EV plus electricity, you'll probably find that the EV is already cheaper. So that's the other piece we've got to get across to people, is it's the misperception or the asset value is misleading in some way, because 70% of all new registrations of EVs of all cars, are typically leased now. And so when you take a leased model and you add in the fuel or the electricity that you are consuming every month to push that thing along, you probably find the EV is cheaper already.
Yeah, and also add servicing and maintenance in as well, because as I said last week to these people, I haven't used any brakes in 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're absolutely right. The regenerative braking is just fantastic. You can drive around for hundreds of miles without touching the brake, without maintenance, and you can drive in and out of London without any fear of ultra low emission zone problems. And so there's lots and lots of, and not to mention benefit in kind tax on company cars, which is monumentally different. So there's the cost disparity there, or the price, the tax implications are massive for running a very nice EV versus a very nice petrol or diesel equivalent. So there's lots of very, very good financial incentives to make that switch now.
And I think if you've got somewhere like a nice, where you're having your coffee, you can see somewhere that's sort of highlighting that, then I think that'll be really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, we'll have to come visit.
Yes.
It sounds like I've got to drag Ian down south, and we'll come visit.
Careful now.
Excellent stuff. Well, Sam, thanks so much for spending time with us. Really appreciate it. Hopefully it has been beneficial to listeners. And as if we've got our listeners or viewers, we've got questions, we'll take them, make notes and pass them on, and and maybe get you back on in the future once you've got some few more bits of progress on some of this stuff.
Yeah, that too.
Thanks to Gary and Richard. We'll be back same time, same place next week. You can email me, ian@legislifestyle.com. I'm at Ian Dixon on Twitter. If you like this video, please like us on YouTube. It always helps us out. And subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next week.